3 days before my birthday, I stopped pretending it was coincidence. I was standing in my kitchen when my phone lit up. My mother's name glowed on the screen, a name I had saved with a small heart beside it years ago, back when that felt true, back when I still believed proximity meant love. The heart looked wrong to me now. It had looked wrong for months, maybe longer, but I hadn't had the courage to remove it until this moment, while the phone vibrated against the countertop and I stood there, not rushing to answer. I already knew what she was going to say. Not the exact words, because my mother had a talent for variation. She was a woman who believed if you changed the costume, you changed the play. But I knew the outcome the way you know the end of a book you've read 4 times. The pages feel different in your hands. The weight of what's coming lives in your chest before the words even form. I let it ring once more, then picked up. Alara, her voice was tight, the way it got when she had rehearsed something and was now hoping I wouldn't ask too many questions. How are you, sweetheart? She never started with how are you, unless she needed the small talk to soften what came next. I'm fine, Mom. I kept my voice even. I walked to the counter where a half-wrapped gift box sat under the pendant light, silver paper, a blue satin ribbon I'd picked myself because no one else was going to make it feel special if I didn't. What's going on? A pause, small and loaded. It's about Saturday, she said. Something's come up with your brother, we might need to reschedule. Might. That word, that careful, deniable little word that wasn't quite a cancellation, wasn't quite a promise, existed only to keep me from reacting the way I was fully entitled to react. Might, as though my birthday were a dental appointment, a lunch reservation, something penciled in lightly that the weather could erase. I looked at the silver paper. I had bought it at a small boutique on Meridian Street because they wrapped rolls of it in black tissue, the kind of shop that made you feel like the act of wrapping something was itself a form of tenderness. I had stood in that aisle for 4 minutes choosing between silver and gold, and I had chosen silver because it reminded me of winter mornings, clean, untouched, full of potential. My name is Alara Quinn, I said quietly, mostly to myself, maybe a little to her. I'm turning 36 on Saturday, you've missed the last 4. She didn't answer that. She never did. Answering would require acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would require accountability, and my mother had spent the better part of a decade perfecting the art of emotional invisibility, being present enough that you couldn't accuse her of being gone, but absent enough that she was never really there. Instead, she sighed, a long maternal sigh that used to make me feel guilty for needing things. You know how he gets, she said. Yeah, I did. I knew exactly how Ethan got. I had a list. Not a metaphorical list, not the kind you compile in the grieving architecture of your mind. An actual list, in my notes app, with dates and details, the way you document symptoms for a doctor who kept telling you everything was fine. Last year, a car problem the night of my birthday dinner that had somehow resolved itself by the following morning. The year before, a panic attack that manifested precisely during my 7 p.m. reservation and evaporated before 10 p.m. when the restaurant would have been closed anyway. The year before that, something vague about him not feeling safe, which my parents had treated as a medical emergency, and I had treated with a quiet, private devastation I told no one about. Always urgent, always believable enough, always gone when it was over. I'll call you later, my mother added, and then she hung up before I could respond. I stood holding the phone to my ear for a few seconds after the line went dead. An old habit, the body's refusal to accept an abrupt ending. My thumb eventually lowered. I set the phone face down on the counter. I looked at the gift I had wrapped for myself. And for the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel disappointed. I felt done. I didn't cry after the call, that was new. In previous years, there had always been tears, not dramatic, heaving sobs, but the quiet, persistent kind that sneak out while you're doing something mundane, washing a dish, staring at a candle flame, sitting in your car in a parking lot because you can't go back inside and face a night you'd planned for. The kind of crying that feels less like grief and more like leaking. Like a pipe in the wall you can't quite find. This time, I just moved. I pulled a chair out from under the kitchen table, sat down, and opened my notes app. The document was already there, titled simply, Dates. I had started it 8 months ago on a Thursday evening in February when I was eating leftover pasta alone and something inside me, some quiet, long patient part of me, finally refused to keep forgetting. The list stared back at me now, 61 entries across 2 years. I scrolled slowly. March 14, my promotion dinner. Ethan called Mom from a parking lot somewhere in the valley, said he was spiraling. They left before the appetizers arrived. June 2, my surgery consult. Benign turned out, but I didn't know that yet. I sat in the waiting room alone for 3 hours. Mom texted, "Thinking of you, Ethan needed me last night, long story, will call soon." She called 4 days later. November 28, Thanksgiving. I hosted for the first time, made everything from scratch. They arrived 40 minutes late, left 2 hours early because Ethan had called and sounded off. I ate the rest of the turkey alone over 3 days. December 25, Ethan locked out, emergency. They left at 9:30 p.m. I sat beside the tree until midnight because it felt too sad to go to sleep. February 3, my performance review. I told them I was nervous about it. Mom forgot to ask. Dad asked about Ethan's new apartment instead. I closed the list. The thing about patterns is that they're invisible when you're inside them. They only become visible when you step back far enough to see the shape, and the shape, once seen, cannot be unseen. I had spent years constructing alternative explanations, charity interpretations, generous rewrites of the same story. He's sensitive. He struggles. He needs more. That's not their fault. I told myself these things the way you tell yourself the noise in the house is just the pipes, not because you believe it, but because the alternative requires action you're not ready to take. But patterns don't lie, people do. What I understood now, looking at the list in the flat light of my kitchen, was something I had known for much longer than I'd admitted. Ethan never sounded desperate when he called them. He always sounded calm, composed, even with an almost bored certainty that they would come. He didn't call them with urgency. He called them with expectation. The way you call a service you've subscribed to. The way you pick up a tool from the shed. I used to think it meant he needed them more. Now I understood something colder. He didn't need them. He just needed me not to have them. There is a difference between a person who is drowning and a person who has learned that standing at the edge of the pool gets them what they want. The drowning person can't help it. The second person has made a decision. I didn't know if Ethan was conscious of it. I had spent too long trying to determine that, and the answer, ultimately, didn't change anything. Conscious or not, the effect was identical. I was subtracted from my own life every single time. I closed the Notes app and set my phone down. I looked around the apartment, really looked at it, the way you only look at places you are about to leave. The bookshelf I'd assembled alone on a Sunday afternoon, cursing the instructions and proud of the crooked result. The throw blanket on the couch in a deep terracotta color I'd chosen because no one else was going to choose it for me. The collection of small framed prints along the hallway wall, each one picked from a different market or gallery or online shop during a different season of my life. Evidence of a person who existed. Evidence of a person who had been building herself quietly, in the margins, in the spaces between cancellations. They had never noticed, not because the apartment wasn't beautiful, because they weren't looking. For years, I had waited for them to choose me. That night, sitting in my kitchen with the silver-wrapped box on the counter and 61 entries in a notes document on my phone, I understood something that arrived not as heartbreak, but as cold, clarifying fact. They already had. They had just chosen someone else. I didn't call them back. That was the first break in the pattern, and I felt it the way you feel a crack forming underfoot, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. Something shifting where you had long believed the ground was solid. I stood up from the kitchen chair. I walked to the counter and looked at the silver-wrapped box for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called the restaurant. It was a place called Orvielle, a quiet, wood-paneled room on the east side of the city, with candles on every table and a chef who made pasta by hand in the open kitchen. I had chosen it carefully. I had made the reservation 6 weeks ago for a party of 6, because 6 had felt like the right number for a birthday, enough people that the table would be warm, enough people that there would be laughter from multiple directions. I had imagined the evening in small, specific ways. The way the bread would arrive with good olive oil. The way we'd order too much and not care. The way 36 might feel survivable, even good, surrounded by the people who knew me. 6 people, me, my parents, my brother. If he came, 2 friends. 2 friends, who still didn't know the dinner might not happen. The line rang twice. Orvielle, good evening. Hi, I said, steady. I have a reservation for Saturday evening under Quinn, party of 6. Yes, Ms. Quinn, how can I help you? I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. A woman standing alone in a lit room, wearing a gray cardigan she'd bought on sale, hair pulled back. She looked calmer than I expected. She looked like someone who had already decided. I'd like to change the reservation, I said. A polite pause. Of course, any changes to the time or date? No, just the number. I watched myself in the glass. Party of 1. A beat, just a single beat of silence on the other end. Not judgment, just the small human moment of recalibration. Of course, the voice said again, gently. I'll update that for you, Ms. Quinn. We'll make sure you're well taken care of. When I hung up, the apartment felt different. Quieter. Not the hollow quiet of an empty house, but the intentional quiet of a decision. Something had stopped vibrating. Something that had been humming at a frequency I'd grown so accustomed to I'd mistaken it for normal. The constant low-grade tension of waiting to be disappointed had simply gone still. I went to the closet. I pulled out the medium suitcase. Not the large one I used for long trips, not the small carry-on for weekends. The medium one, charcoal gray, that I had always associated with moves of consequence. I set it on the bed and unzipped it. I didn't rush. Rushing would have meant panic, and I didn't feel panicked. I felt the opposite of panicked. I felt like someone performing a precise and necessary surgery, each movement deliberate, each item placed with the quiet authority of someone who has finally made up her mind. Clothes first. The ones that felt like me, not the things I'd kept because they were practical or because someone had given them to me. The deep green dress I wore when I wanted to feel like I was taking up the right amount of space. The soft black sweater with the wide sleeves. 2 pairs of jeans. The white button-down I'd had for 6 years that somehow still looked like itself. The small things. A journal I'd been filling slowly. A silver ring from a shop in Lisbon. A photo of my best friend Danny and me from 3 years ago at the coast. Both of us laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. Halfway through, my phone buzzed on the bed. A text from my father. I picked it up. Your brother's not doing well. We're going to stay with him a few days. We'll celebrate when we get back. I read it twice, then I typed back 2 words. Don't rush. I hit send. I watched the message settle into the thread like a stone dropped into still water. 3 dots appeared immediately, my father typing, then stopped, then started again, then stopped. Nothing came through. That silence said more than any explanation ever had. I set the phone down and went back to packing. Each folded shirt felt like a small, quiet goodbye, not a dramatic one, the kind of goodbye that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need an audience. By midnight, everything that mattered fit into 1 suitcase and a canvas tote bag. I did a slow walk through the apartment. The couch where I'd sat for hours after canceled dinners, trying to convince myself I wasn't allowed to be angry. The kitchen where I'd cooked full meals, roasted chicken, proper birthday cakes, the elaborate brunch I'd made for my 34th for people who didn't show up. The window above the sink where I'd stood, dishwater cooling on my hands, watching their car pull away down the street more times than I could count. I stood at that window now. The street below was quiet, amberlit, a bicycle chained to a pole, a paper bag caught against a fence in the wind. I didn't look away until I was ready. Then my phone buzzed again. My mother. We're already on the road. Ethan's really upset. We'll make it up to you, sweetheart. Sweetheart. I read it twice. I opened my contacts and found her name. I stared at it for a moment, Mom with the small heart I'd added years ago, and then I changed it. Not to something cruel, not to something cold. Just to Linda. Her name, the name she had before she was my mother, before any of this was complicated. I don't know exactly why I did that instead of deleting the contact or blocking it immediately. Maybe I needed to see her as a person first, separate from the role, before I could let her go. Maybe naming her accurately was the last honest thing I could do before I left. I stared at Linda in my contacts and waited to feel something crack open in my chest. Nothing did. So I picked up my keys, I lifted my suitcase, and I walked out. The hallway outside my apartment smelled like fresh paint and someone else's cooking garlic and something warm, a Thursday night in a building full of people living their ordinary lives. Normal, unbothered. The world in diff. Rent to the fact that I was walking out of it. I locked my door. I slid the key into the envelope I'd already labeled for my landlord because I had known, somewhere beneath the surface of the last few weeks, that this night was coming. The envelope was already sealed. No note inside. No explanation. Just the key and the implicit message that endings don't require narration to be real. I pressed the elevator button. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Ethan! I almost laughed. In 4 years of birthdays missed and dinners canceled and moments erased, Ethan had never once called me directly. He didn't need to, he had our parents for that. He would place a distress signal and they would transmit it, concerned, urgent, full of the language of crisis, and I would receive it secondhand, already translated, already stripped of anything I could challenge. That was the architecture. That was how it worked. The elevator arrived. I stepped in and stood there while the doors closed, watching my phone ring. I almost let it go. I almost stayed consistent, stayed silent, stayed gone the way I had decided to be gone. But something, not hope, not weakness, something more like the desire for final confirmation made me answer. Hey, said Ethan. His voice was calm, not the voice of someone whose parents had driven through the night for him, not fragile, not fractured, not the voice described in my mother's texts. Calm the way a person is calm on a Tuesday morning when nothing is wrong. You're good, I asked. A pause, then a soft sound almost amused. Yeah, a beat. Why wouldn't I be? I leaned back against the elevator wall. The numbers dropped, 765. Mom said you weren't doing well, I said. A longer pause. I could hear him process the information, not the shock of someone blindsided, but the particular stillness of someone recalibrating. She said that. She said you were upset, that you needed them. Silence. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. I stepped out slowly, as if sudden movement might break something. I didn't call them, Ethan said. Simple, flat. The words of someone stating a fact they have no particular investment in. And there it was. The last piece. The one I hadn't been sure I needed until it arrived. I stood in the lobby of my building, gray tile floor, brass mailboxes along one wall, the faint hum of the heating system overhead, and felt everything I had spent years trying to understand finally arrange itself into the only shape it had ever been. They hadn't gone to Ethan because he'd called. They hadn't disrupted my birthday because he needed them. They had created a reason. They had picked up the phone and called him a reason and gone, and left me standing in my kitchen with silver gift wrap and 61 entries in a list that documented a pattern they never bothered to examine. Happy early birthday, Alara, Ethan said lightly, like he was signing off a card. I ended the call. I stood in the lobby and let the last illusion dissolve. Not dramatically, not like a wave crashing or a wall falling, more like fog lifting, the slow, quiet revelation of a landscape that had been there all along, just obscured. Not anger, not even grief. Just clarity, the specific clarity that arrives when you finally stop arguing with the truth and simply let it be true. Ethan hadn't needed a reason. They had built one for him. Maybe because it was easier. Maybe because the story of a son in distress was more compelling than the story of a daughter who just wanted to be shown up for. Maybe because Ethan asked for things in ways that demanded response, even if he hadn't, this time, actually asked at all. Maybe because I had spent so many years making myself easy to disappoint that I had accidentally made myself easy to forget. I would never know the full architecture of their psychology. I wasn't sure it mattered anymore. I pushed through the lobby doors and stepped outside. It was colder than I expected. October had been warm all week, the stubborn warmth of a season that refuses to release its hold, and I hadn't thought to grab a heavier jacket. The night air cut through my cardigan immediately, sharp, clean, almost bracing, the way cold air sometimes feels like a correction rather than a discomfort. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Above me, the sky was that specific city dark, not true black, not truly starless, but the deep bruised purple of a sky pressed down by light pollution, with a few stars visible if you looked long enough and patient enough. I looked up for a moment. I let myself feel the cold. For years I had blamed Ethan. His timing, his instincts, his apparent radar for the moments I needed my family most, and his gift for disrupting them. I had constructed elaborate theories about his psychology, his motivations, his buried resentments. I had convinced myself the problem was him, his neediness, his gravitational pull on our parents, the way suffering had become. The language he used to communicate. But standing outside my former building, phone still warm in my hand, the truth arranged itself more clearly than it ever had. He hadn't asked this time. Maybe he hadn't asked many of the times before. Maybe some of them, yes, maybe some of those 61 entries were genuinely him, reaching out, needing help, and they had answered, and that was fine, that was what parents do. But this time he hadn't asked. This time, my parents had invented the reason. Which meant the story I had told myself, Ethan pulls them away, Ethan needs them, Ethan doesn't leave room for me, was only half the story. The other half was simpler and sharper and harder to look at. My parents had, on some level, chosen to go, not because Ethan needed them, because it was easier than staying. I was the harder choice. Not because I was difficult, not because I was demanding, not because I asked for too much. I was the harder choice because I was the one who noticed when they didn't show up. I was the one who kept a list. I was the one who, if they stayed and got it wrong, would feel it in ways that required them to reckon with what they'd done. Ethan didn't require reckoning. He just required presence. You showed up, you sat with him, you left feeling useful, and nothing was ever examined too closely. There was a simplicity to that, a comfort in it. I was not simple. I had never been the simple choice, and I think I had been punished for that my entire adult life without understanding why. I walked to my car, parked across the street beneath a maple tree that had turned completely red in the last week, its leaves glowing faintly under the streetlight. I opened the trunk and lifted my suitcase in. I put the canvas tote on the back seat. I got in, adjusted the seat out of habit even though nothing had changed, and started the engine. The heater came on. The windshield began to clear. I sat there for a moment in the warming car, watching my breath slow. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then something made me answer. Alara, my mother's voice. Tight, fractured, with the quality of something held together by will. She must have borrowed a phone, a neighbor, a gas station, Ethan's landline. She had found a way because when she wanted something badly enough, she always found a way. I thought about that for a brief moment. She had found a way to reach me when she needed something. She had not found a way, 4 times in a row, when I needed her. Why did you block us? She asked. I put the car in drive. I did not pull out of the spot yet. I sat there, hands on the wheel. Because you believed something that wasn't true, I said. A silence. We didn't know, she whispered. You didn't check, I replied. There is a version of this conversation where I would have softened that, where I would have added I know it's complicated, or I'm not saying you meant to, or any of the dozen small qualifications I had spent years inserting into my own hurt to make it easier for other people to hear. I didn't do that. I said the true thing without decoration. You didn't check. You had a phone, you had Ethan's number. It would have taken 40 seconds to text him and ask, "Are you okay?" And 40 seconds more to read the reply. You chose not to. You chose instead to take the story as given, build it into an emergency, and drive away from your daughter's birthday on the basis of a feeling, a pattern, a comfortable habit of being needed. You didn't check. We'll come back, my mother said, voice thinner now. We'll fix it. I put the car in gear. You're already gone, I told her. A sharp inhale on the other end. The sound of someone registering a sentence they can't immediately answer. I pulled away from the curb and started toward the highway. The neighborhood moved past familiar streets, the late-night corner store with its blue neon sign, the park where I'd walked on Sunday mornings. "We chose your brother because he needed us," she said finally. Defensive now, the fragility hardening into argument. I drove, I didn't raise my voice. "No," I said, "you chose who was easier to love." Silence stretched across the line. Not the silence of someone preparing a response. The silence of someone who has been given an accurate sentence and doesn't know what to do with it. My mother was many things, avoidant, conflict-averse, skilled at the soft reframe, but she was not unintelligent. She knew on some level what I was describing. She had always known. Knowledge and action are different animals entirely. "Is that what you really think?" she asked finally. Her voice had gone small. Smaller than I'd heard it in years, maybe ever. The careful composure of a woman who had spent decades managing everyone else's feelings had slipped open, and underneath it was something more genuinely human. A mother confronting the possibility that she had failed in a specific and irreversible way. I thought about the question. Seriously, I didn't dismiss it. I thought about every dinner I'd eaten alone, every milestone I'd narrated to an empty room, every time I had deflated my own needs in advance, apologized for having a birthday, for needing a witness, for being someone who occasionally required the people who loved her to simply show up. I thought about all the times I had rewritten my own hurt in the second draft, told myself the story differently, made it smaller, more manageable, more forgivable. I thought about the silver-wrapped box on my kitchen counter that I hadn't even opened yet, because I'd bought it for myself, and the point wasn't the gift. The point was the ritual. The point was someone bearing witness to the fact that I was here and I mattered, and another year of my life had passed, and that was worth marking. I thought about 36 years, of being the easier one to leave. "I don't think it anymore," I said. "I know it." The highway entrance appeared ahead. A green sign, white letters. The name of the city I was driving toward, a city they didn't know, a city they'd never visited, a city that had no history with them, no furniture they'd helped move, no holiday they'd turned complicated. A city that was entirely mine. "We can do better," my mother said. And I heard in it, I genuinely heard it, a real desire. Not performance. Something more like grief's first cousin, the recognition of a loss you could have prevented and didn't. But desire is not the same as change. Can do better is a direction, not a destination. And I had stood at that threshold before, holding the door open, believing that this time the better would actually arrive. I had believed it 4 times in 4 years of birthdays. I had believed it on the night of my promotion dinner, my surgery consult. Every Christmas I'd reorganized myself around the hope that this time things would be different. I had the receipts. They were in a notes app on my phone with 61 entries. "That's not my job to wait for," I said. I merged onto the highway. The city opened up ahead, then fell away behind me. The road stretched out, dark, wide, lit at intervals by the pale orange of highway lights. There was almost no traffic. Just me and the engine and the white lines ticking past in the headlights. There's something about a highway at night that feels like a different dimension from ordinary life. The way it strips everything back to motion and direction. The way every exit you pass is a choice you're not making. Every mile is a small declaration. I am going here, not there, here. "I hope you figure it out," I said. "For him, for yourselves." A pause, and then, quietly, carefully, like a question she wasn't sure she was allowed to ask. "And for you." I looked ahead at the road. The white lines, the dark, the distance. "For me," I said, "I already did." I ended the call. The restaurant at Saturday evening was quiet. Orvielle on a cool October night, the last of the warm months finally gone. The candles on every table doing the particular work candles do in autumn, not just light, but warmth, the suggestion of being held. I arrived 10 minutes early. The host, a young man with dark hair and an easy manner, took my name and walked me to my table without any particular ceremony. A small table near the window, not the center of the room, which I preferred. Outside the glass, the street was alive in the muted way of Saturday evenings, couples walking, someone with a dog, a lit-up bus moving past. The world going about its unbothered business. The table was set for one. A single water glass, a single menu, a candle in a small amber holder. I sat down. I had been afraid of this moment, afraid of the way a table for one might feel like a confession, a defeat, a public admission of something I didn't want to admit. I had expected it to sting. I had braced for the old familiar sadness that used to settle over me every time I was reminded that I was doing this life largely alone. It didn't sting. It felt unexpectedly like something I had earned. The waiter came. I ordered the good wine, not the second cheapest thing on the list, which is what I usually ordered when I was with other people and didn't want to seem extravagant, but the one I actually wanted, a burgundy that cost more than I would normally justify for a Tuesday night. This wasn't a Tuesday night. This was my birthday. I ordered it without apology and without explanation. The bread arrived with a small dish of oil and a pinch of flaky salt. I ate it slowly. I watched the street. At some point during the soup course, I became aware of something I couldn't quite name, a quiet, persistent sensation in my chest that I kept trying to categorize. Not grief, not the hollowness I'd felt at previous birthdays when the people I'd expected hadn't come. Something else. Smaller, warmer. It took me until the pasta to understand what it was. It was company. I was good company for myself. I was sitting at a table. Alone, and I was, genuinely and without performance, not lonely. I was present. I was eating food I'd chosen. I was drinking wine I wanted. I was watching the street and thinking thoughts that were entirely my own, untranslated, unmodified, not shaped for an audience. I was simply here, being myself, and that was, it turned out, enough. More than enough. I had spent years believing that enough required witnesses. That a moment only counted if someone else could confirm it had happened. That a birthday only meant something if the right people showed up to make it meaningful. I understood now that I had been wrong. The meaning had always been mine to make. After dinner, I ordered a small dessert, a chocolate tart with sea salt and something floral I couldn't identify, but that tasted like September used to smell. The waiter brought a single candle stuck in it, unprompted, and said with a genuine smile, "Happy birthday." I thanked him. I didn't make it small. I looked at the candle. I thought about what to wish for, the way you do when you're a child, and the wish matters in a simple, uncomplicated way. As an adult, I had usually wished for things that were really just requests. I wish this would work out. I wish they would change. I wish next year would be different. This year, I didn't wish for anything to change. I blew out the candle and made no wish at all. Because the only thing I wanted, I had already given myself. The drive in the dark, the door I had locked, the envelope left for the landlord, the key I had released. The table, for one. The new city was smaller than I expected and quieter than I'd feared. I had rented a furnished apartment on the third floor of a building that smelled like old wood and good plaster. The windows faced east, which I hadn't thought to ask about, but which turned out to be the best accident. I woke up on Sunday morning to light coming through the curtains at an angle that turned the room gold. I lay there for a while. The new city had no associations yet. No couch where I'd cried after canceled dinners. No kitchen where I'd cooked for people who didn't show. No window where I'd watched cars pass without stopping. Just walls and light and the sound of a Sunday street below, a dog barking somewhere, a bicycle, someone speaking to someone else in a language I didn't know. Ordinary life. Someone else's ordinary life, not yet mine but available. I picked up my phone from the nightstand. No messages from blocked numbers, because there were no unblocked numbers left from that world to message me. A text from Danny, my best friend, who knew because I'd told her Thursday night, "Happy birthday, you extraordinary person. Call me when you surface. I love you beyond the map." I looked at that for a long time. Then I got up, made coffee in the small machine that came with the furnished apartment, and stood at the east window with the cup between my hands, watching the morning arrive. At some point I would build something here. A life with shape and intention, the kind of life I had been building quietly in the margins of my old one, but without the constant low-grade weather of waiting for people to show up. I would call Danny. I would make new reservations. I would find a bookshop and a coffee place and a running route that felt like mine. I would turn 36 and 37, and eventually 40 in cities and rooms I had chosen, and the choosing would be the celebration. I thought about my parents briefly, the way you think about weather systems that have moved on. Not with bitterness. Bitterness requires ongoing investment and energy I was no longer willing to spend. Just a thought, clean and bounded. They chose, I chose. We are now choosing separately. I thought about Ethan, too. About the calm in his voice. About happy early birthday, Alara said lightly, like a man who had no idea what that phrase cost. No idea what it meant that he was wishing it to me from the other side of a phone call that had just dismantled the last architecture of a story I'd been living inside for years. I didn't know who Ethan was, really. I had constructed a version of him from second-hand reports and accumulated grievance, and I was wise enough now to know that the construction was not the person. Maybe he was worse than I thought. Maybe he was simply oblivious. Maybe somewhere in his own life he carried damage he didn't know how to name. I didn't know. I might never know. That was okay. It was not mine to solve. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the cup. I opened my notes app and found the document titled Dates. I read through it one more time, all 61 entries. I read them the way you read a chapter you've already survived, not to relive it but to mark it. To say, this happened, this was real, I am not making it up. The body keeps score and so should the record. Then I deleted the document. Not because I wanted to forget, because I didn't need it anymore. I had internalized what it was trying to tell me. The lesson had landed. The pattern had been named, and named things lose a particular kind of power. I opened a new document. I titled it, What I'm Building. And I began.